is that proper, typical, ideal. A lot of people call it in different ways. Okay. Before we do that, I thought I'll come back to that experiment, that little exercise that you're doing on children's book and draw with a fewer lines. Do you see any relationship between what we discussed and those exercises?
Yeah.
Huh?
The core.
Yeah. Now, let me see in the afternoon. Let us see what you have done. But if you successfully done it, it's wonderful. Yeah. That's one way of understanding what is core. Right? As far as fewer lines are concerned, is again the lines that deal with core that come out. What is typical, that comes out very clearly on that, which is quite different than it being information rich. It's information rich from the point of view of it being a typical representative example. Okay, so there's a difference, and mostly it will be semantic devices that will get represented in these things. Okay, now this is an assignment that you stay with for the next 12 days. And you have to submit this. This is where 2A and 2B come. Initially, you'll do it together, but later on, after sort of end of next week, we will separate into 2A, 2B. Yeah? You can select one or two areas for your major group project. I'll show you the areas from which you can select. Then collect as many images from Google to create an image bank. Okay. Separate images of what is generally available in India from what is not available. Now I'll explain you why this is so. Okay, and search for medium size images, 600 by 800, because you need to show them in a bigger thing later on. Okay, enlargement needed later, so that's the reason why it is at least 600 by 800, and avoid noise if necessary. Clean it up, which is what Sakshi did for me during her vacation. Yeah. She collected and cleaned up a few images. All right. The way we will do it is as follows. You can be either in product, you can either be in building interiors, you can be in print, or you can be in cartoon, animation, or whatever. Your group has to select one of the areas. Okay. I found yesterday, I read some of what you expect from the course. Some of you who are not in product design wanted to know more about product design. Good. Then I think you should you should persuade a group to take something in product design so you get to know it. Some of you who want to be in product design and want to know a little more about print and things like that should probably look at. You can see tablecloth, pen, and these two were done in Guwahati. And it will be nice if somebody takes that. We can actually use, I'll show you a comparison later. It was a 10-day workshop there, right? Appliances would mean all the kitchen things which you use. Yeah, it could be jewelry, or it could be a non-existent product, which is what I did in Guwahati, because it's a very different thing when you work for a non-existent product. For instance, their idea is that how do you carry coin when you go in public transport? You know, because you need to carry them immediately. Conductor ko dena padta hai. No such product exists right now. There are purses and men's and ladies' purses, and it's quite unwieldy too. So can you design a product, and what do you do? Because how do you define a category? Because the product doesn't exist. There's a way about going about it. You can select any of those things. In buildings, it can be resort, apartment, commercial building, theaters. It can be any of those things, or it can be right now a combination of it, and then you can focus on what you want to do. Interiors, it can be pub, restaurant, clubs, gyms, center. Even the furniture item like a center table or any of those. But take something which is not very complex. Okay, because ultimately you would also come out with design proposals on that. In print, you can have children's book, but be age specific, because as you say that their idea of mainstream keeps changing very fast, unlike ours. So what they consider as being proper for age group of 6, an age group of 10, and age group of 15 is very different. Those who have done games, they already know that. Because moment you grow to 8, then you don't want to play any of the games which you played when you were 6 years. So it's a very rapid development. You can also do, if you want, you can also do for older people also. For instance, it's quite possible that you can do, say, book for, something like Political Weekly or a coffee table magazine or a women's magazine for older kind of a group. Last year, somebody did wrapping papers also, gift wrappers and things like that. You can do a game, you can do a poster, whatever. All this is possible. In cartoon, you can actually think of a character in a cartoon, which you can develop using this method. I will give you enough time to work on what your group wants to do. I'll be there in the afternoon to discuss with you. Then you select what suits you best. Okay. You are supposed to come out with an image. You're not supposed to come out with a working. Okay. So if you are doing, suppose you are doing game, the game doesn't have to work. You have to look at pubs or something like that. You don't need plan and things like that. Pub doesn't have to work like a pub. What makes it look pub-like? Okay. That is what is important. If you want to do a restaurant or a resort or something, what makes a resort a resort? Is there something called a resortness that is common to resorts? That's what we are trying to investigate. Okay. So this particularly, what I'll do is I'll just take a printout of this, and maybe we'll stick here. Then you can select whatever you want. Yeah. No. Okay. This is a good question. Initially, all four will work on it. Requires that group effort. Otherwise, it doesn't come to a finished thing, right? So, if you suppose you decide to select, say, interiors and several kinds of interiors, then you need manpower to collect all those images, edit them, and all that kind of thing. So, it will be collective. Somewhere around middle and end of next week, we'll separate them into group. They will. That's where we go into bicultural issues and things like that. So right now it will be a joint project, because we are trying to understand what is the semantic space. What we are trying to do is to build semantic space in stages. Okay. Oh, this is a problem. Okay. Just a quick review that we discussed the difference between the real world and the mental world. When you create a product or an object or whatever, poster or whatever it is, you create in the real world, but ultimately your goal is to influence mental world, right? That is the intention behind it, right? And we also saw it doesn't reflect, it creates its own category, its own structure and things like that. So nothing remains as discrete item. It becomes what is important is to develop complex interconnections of design with whatever happens. So this is, there could be a typical cup, a non-typical cup, and an untypical cup. All those can be. But in real world, they exist as cups. Nobody calls them as non-cups. Okay. Typical also, the words that are used to refer to mainstream is, it's called as a typical example, it is called as proper example, it's called as ideal example. Ideal not from the point of view any moral thing, but ideal example to communicate. That's what it means. Or it's called as a prototypical example, it's also called as set of traits which define that. So it's not one single example, but a set of visual clues which seem to refer to mainstream. For instance, if you look at mainstream films, you will see that one film doesn't contain all of them, but there are typical traits that occur in main film in some combination or other. So it can refer to any of them. This actually comes from what is called as a feature theory. This is one theory that is used to understand how brain works. The working definition is based on that. That mental constructs or concepts are represented by a set of elements in the brain. The set may include unique descriptions, images, attributes, and some mixture of these three. Okay, and we are trying to ultimately access this using some of the techniques that we have. So we'll just quickly go through a small experiment. I will show a word here and try to see what unique descriptions, images or things come in your mind, okay, and write them down quickly. Fine. Ready? I'll just show you the word. Go by the gut feel of what came in your mind, don't intellectualize. Okay, so what came in your mind? Anybody? Okay, Farad. Window ledge. Flight. Okay. So you could see how this concept is associated with so much of information. Some of it is visual information, some of it is behavioral information. That it comes and sits on the ledge is a behavioral information. That it goes and sits on the trees may be a behavior information, right? But some of it is visual, okay? So you could see this happening. You know, you can see that the semantic features of parrot can be, it's a biped, has wings and distinctive colors and patterns, perches on trees, undomesticated, etc., etc. You can go on adding this list kind of thing. But it's important to have this division. Some of them are visual attributes and some of them are behavioral attributes, okay? Both are semantic features, okay? In our project that we are doing, we are just totally neglecting behavioral, okay? And when you say visual, some of them are not necessarily visual. They can be oral, it can be many other things, depending on the what kind of a product that you have. If it's music, it can be oral also, okay? For instance, Rahmanishness of Rahman music comes as oral clues, right? It doesn't come as visual clues at all, okay? Surprisingly, there is one product in which oral clues was they were trying to patent an oral clue. Harley Davidson wanted to patent the sound of their engine, okay? Because they say it's so unique that we don't want others to imitate that kind of sound. You know? So it's quite likely that the features that we are talking about may be oral, may be visual, and maybe others. You know, if you are looking at food, then it may be very different. But basically, they're sensory. Okay. The question is, how do you decide which features are critical? One is your subjective judgment. You as a designer can do it yourself, saying that no, I feel that these are the typical features which are associated. But then there is always a problem. Designers think in a different way because they are taught to think in a different way, right? Other one is search what people think you and perceive, and this is exactly the focus of what you are going to know now. Can we investigate through some tools how people perceive what is typical, not what you perceive as typical. The second approach is user-centric and is thus consistent with the modern thinking. Tools allow you to compare these differences. That means you can actually, when you use the tool, you can ask 3 designers to do it and another 10 people to do it and see whether there is any difference or not. Doesn't mean everywhere there is a difference, but one expects. There are 2 methods that we are going to introduce: linguistic hedges and typicality. You have a group of 4. 2 people can work on linguistic hedges, the other one can work on typicality. Okay. And we will compare. Normally, they will not give identical result, but there will be slight differences. Let's look at typicality. Take any example, and you can say, truly speaking, this is, say, a mixer or a sparrow or whatever it is. Okay. Then, technically speaking, this is a sparrow or whatever. And loosely speaking, this is a particular product. Okay, you can see there are 3 meanings which are possible. Truly speaking is a good, proper, ideal example. It's a sparrow which has got a small, correct size and does this PPP, and then sits on the ledge, and whatever you thought about, that is a truly speaking a sparrow. It's quite likely that there may be a sparrow that you may come across which is green. Then you say that technically saying it's a sparrow because there's many other features of sparrow, but it's not a sparrow. So technically saying it's still a sparrow. Yeah, but and loosely speaking is where it does share very little. Now we'll go to the exact definition of it little later. Yeah, this is good enough to understand that truly speaking is a very, very proper example. Technically speaking is not so typical, somewhere in the middle, and loosely speaking is somewhere here. Yeah. What we are going to do is that there is a web tool which Prasad will introduce you in the afternoon, where you can actually go on the web tool, and there are these 3 compartments. You can keep your you can keep your images, and you can drag and drop them. That means you can ask user to drag and drop. He doesn't have to know much except the meanings of what is truly speaking, what is typical and all that, right? And I think some standard examples, birds and all are there, right? Yeah. What is this? Is created a practice exercise where all these birds and all which we borrow from you, they are there. So you can actually practice with it to see what happens, how the tool is used. Okay, this is another thing, truly speaking, what is design? Ever thought about it? There are a lot of things which technically speaking are design, but we still call them as design. And there are a lot of things which loosely speaking as design, and we also call them as design. Okay, I don't want to solve that riddle. It was something which was part of my first lecture, introductory lecture. If you remember that. Okay. Truly speaking, this is a kettle, and you see typically examples of kettle which look like kettle and has all the characteristics of typical kettle. Technically speaking, this is a kettle, and loosely speaking, this is a kettle. And this has, I think, the 4th compartment where you reject. People feel that they don't. I mean, it doesn't belong to any of them. Then it goes out. All right. Now, if you do it in sufficient number of people, we are hoping that the tool will have the statistics in place, or at least you'll get an Excel sheet which will create a cumulative score and will give you a kind of a linear structure of this category. Yeah? That means the one that scores maximum would probably be here, and then slowly it will go towards this. In this exercise, it would probably be bunches like this. It would not be exactly a linear. So truly speaking reflects a typical example, technically speaking is not so typical, and loosely speaking is a typical example. The second group is supposed to use the other software, which is typicality rating, okay, where you directly ask people to classify it into 5 compartments. The 6th one is where you reject. The first compartment is, it's a very typical example. Second is typical, not so typical. Oh, sorry, it got it should have been atypical and not so atypical. Oh, correct. Not so atypical and atypical example, right? I expect that your group will use 16 people and 4 designers. Okay. The reason why designers is, I just want to know whether they really think differently or designers think that they think differently. You're not sure about that. So it will at least clarify that issue. Okay. And cumulative score will give you typical as well as the gradient. It will give you the complete gradient. There is a practice assignment where he has already loaded some pictures, and you can actually do it yourself, or you can also get somebody to do it just to get a feel of what all this is about. Yeah. So there are a collection of animals, right? Birds and dogs and things like that. So you can just have a look at that. Okay, and use website to get perceptions of people. Each group shows it to 10 people. That means totally 20. 20 means 16 non-designers and 4 designers, right? And which is typical. The site will give you that gradient. I mean, I'm hoping that at least it will give you an Excel sheet so you can reconstruct that and explore why people perceive category this way. Once you have that category structure, then we can actually discuss why is it that they consider this as typical, why is it that they consider this atypical and all that. We can do that little bit here in the class. Okay, I'll show you, try to classify them as very typical, atypical, not so typical, not so atypical, and atypical. What I'll do is I'll show you the next slide also. There are totally 8 examples. Okay, this is what you have. You want to do this? No, you can put, you see, each one of them will fit somewhere or the other. No, you decide. Write it down.
This is for mugs, right?
Huh?
Mugs.
Yeah, these are all mugs.
So a typical mug or a typical cup?
A typical mug. These are all mugs. There are 5 compartments. If there is something which you don't see fit into mug, you just reject it, saying it's outside the border. I'll switch to the next one, and if you want, we can come back to this later. If you want to go back, you can keep questioning your own decision till you are satisfied. Done? Yeah. It's little easier on the side because you see all of them below in a row, and you can just drag and drop them. It's little easier than this. Okay, so let's look at which you consider as the most atypical example. One. How many people? One is here. How many people for one? Atypical. Yeah. Outside. It's either atypical or outside. That means it's one of those areas where boundaries need to be shifted to include it. Otherwise, it's novelty, right? Let's look at which is the most typical. 4. Where is 4? Yeah, 4. That seems to be the most typical, right? How many people for 4? Okay. Now, you wanted to look at whether there is a unanimity and within a culture. It automatically comes. There's a fair amount of unanimity. Okay, which is next to it? Say typical, not very typical, but 3. Anybody for 3? How many for 3?
3 and 7.
3. Okay. And second is 7. We'll go to 7. Okay. How many for 7? Typical. About 5 of them, right? So now what happens, the way it will get calculated is that it will shift slightly towards somewhere between typical and atypical, because the number is, that's why we need number. There are two reasons why we need number. First is, the whole idea is to get user involved, and second one is to see whether that involvement can lead us to some linear structure of this, correct? So this is exactly the way site is expected to work. We are still in the construction stage. If it doesn't work, please don't blame us. Some ex-IITian is working for us free. He thought that it's a good idea, so he's helping us out. So I think it should work. Okay? So this is what you will be doing with, first in trial you can use the standard thing, birds and whatever, he's got docs there, so you can use docs just to get a feel of it, how it works, and then you are collecting images of the project that you have. Okay, try to edit them, actually it is a good idea to start with about 60 to 80 images, right, and come down to about 30 later. The reason why I'm asking you to select more is, some of them are just too noisy and it will be too much to go into Photoshop and clean up. Or sometimes the product is too small, if you increase it, it gets pixelated, so people don't know what it is. So a lot of such things might get rejected. That is the reason why I'm asking you to collect more, and then you see what is important for you. So in the major assignment, this is what you're doing. Okay. The reason why I'm saying those available in India, that means they don't have to be made in India, they have to be available in India. The reason is that people's perceptions are dictated by what is around them. So if you use docs which are not in India, people don't know what to do with it. Yeah, that's the reason why I'm saying that this should be available in the environment. Okay, each group shows it to 20 people, that is, you can divide 10, 10 and 10. Okay. What are the implications of this data? It gives us information on how people and not designers structure their categories. We'll get that designer separately. It's the first glimpse of semantic space, which is actually a foundation of semantics, and it can be used as a strategic tool. And let me explain you how it becomes useful. I'm not asking you to do this exercise just for itself. This was done in IIT Guwahati. One of the group was working on the table clocks, right? They collected all these images, showed, and typical were somewhere here, non-typical were somewhere, atypical were somewhere, fuzzy boundaries. You can see this happening. Each digit is separate and all that. These are kind of boundaries somewhere here. Some people consider this outside, inside, and things. Now every product category has this cross section of things. Okay, most designers keep you busy in this region, right? Most manufacturers keep you busy in this region. That's the way the real world works. Now what are its implications? First implication is, you can decide where you want to be with your product. Okay, you want to be very close to the mainstream, fine. Then you have to look at that, understand the mainstream, and see how you can create variations which are still close to the mainstream. You can also be a little away from mainstream, the way we looked at some filmmakers and things like that. You can be away somewhere sort of, towards atypical. Then there is a word for that. The word is avant-garde, right? You can be avant-garde, then you're there. Yeah. Can be actually on the boundary, so some people will think they're ready to shift the boundary to include it, some people think not. So it's quite possible to make this decision well in advance in design. So that is an advantage. So I call this as a product category space. You decide, so even if you're doing for children's book, you can decide various kinds of visuals that you have and decide that I want to be close to this, I want to be close to this, or whatever it is, and then look for further work. So it's a strategic tool. It can also be used as a business tool if you combine it with sales volume. But we are not talking business here, so we neglect that aspect of it. Because each of them is popular by various degrees, so you can see where the society is going and where things can be sold. What we are looking for is, as a designer, you should be comfortable and innovative anywhere in the gradient. You don't have to be innovative to be here. You can be innovative here, you can be innovative here also. I hope to prove at the end how that is possible. Okay, when we construct the complete space, we see this is the bottommost row. Then we'll go to the other spaces that we'll construct. The whole semantics place will permit you to make such permutation and combinations that you can be innovative anywhere. Okay, the reason why this is important is, in most cases you don't decide as a designer where your product is going to be. If it's a publisher, he will say, no, I actually market for this kind of a this kind of a crowd or this kind of a cross section of people, so I can't afford to be here, I can be here, and you can still be okay. Most clients initially tell you I want to be very adventurous, okay, but all this requires a lot of money. To keep a product there and make it succeed requires a lot of money, and most people are not willing to pay that kind of money. Once they realize that it's not going to be that, because there's a risk involved and things, so then they sort of shift. Those who did games for Fun School would have by now realized that Fun School doesn't want to go beyond this. Yeah, it's very clear. Initially, their CEO came and gave saying, I want to be different, and IIT should give me something like that. But when it comes to accepting, they will basically accept that. That's Fun School, right? So you could actually place your companies also this way. Companies like Bang & Olufsen, which are in music, they are always here. In fact, they don't even make attempt to go there. They are a top-end company in music. Bose is now, Bose was here, they're gradually shifting towards this. Yeah? So you can actually analyze companies also this way, where they want to be. So as a strategic tool, it will also be useful to you when you start working for a company. How innovation sensitive are they, and are they willing to take risk? But in general, this space also tells you how innovation receptive is your user. That's what this space tells you. If the more volumes are in this, it's not innovation receptive. Okay? So you could see that innovation receptiveness of not a society but users that you talk to will actually get reflected in the product category space. Alright, now we should end with some amount of uncertainty. Yeah. So the question that I want to leave behind is, if we want to be innovative, why do you want to know what exists in the world? This is contradictory, right? If you want to be innovative, why should you worry about what exists in the world? Yeah, you have an answer? No.
So, but maybe like why we want to know what exists in the world is actually not to repeat that thing.
Okay.
Because if we repeat that thing,
there's too much work being done to that. But anyway, that's one reason he has given is we don't want to repeat what exists. No reinventing will. Yes?
So we want some public acceptance after we are kind of afraid if they won't accept. We try to go back if they won't accept.
Okay.
So it can be to map this and find out where is the boundary and where is the.
No, but this, if you want to be innovative, why should you map all this? No need.
But you don't go outside the boundary.
Alright. I'm not going to give that answer. We will gradually deal with that answer as we go along. Okay. This is a very small part of the semantic space that I'm talking about. Gradually, as we go up, automatically the whole other issues come in. How you could be innovative by looking at other things. Okay. Including metaphors and all those, that will come a little later, right? But right now I thought that it's important for you to dwell in your mind that you are looking at existing product and still look at innovation as your basic. There has to be some relationship between the two. Alright? Now, afternoon, we'll meet here, we'll discuss what the project is, and he will also introduce you to the site and see whether you can work with that site. Right? But basically, first thing is, yesterday's project, we would like to see children's thing and that line drawing thing, and also finalize group project. Yeah? The sooner you finalize, the better it is. No? I mean, otherwise, we'll just waste time in the process. So we'll do that. There's no lecture now. Fortunately, you saved. Okay? So we meet later. 2 o'clock. What you are doing now is only this. All the janjat that you are doing is you are actually creating a product category space here. This is what you gradually build in order to go away from it. Yeah, Maithili is looking all. इतना नहीं है, वो same method use करेंगे तो फटाफट हो जाएगा. Okay, so.
Could you flash that list?
Huh?
The that list.
working on is to collect a large number of images, give it to people, which is a more correct method, a more logical way of doing it, and it also involves people. But many times, you may not get, suppose you're working in a company and they always want everything yesterday. So there is not enough time for you to go to users and people. Let's try and look at what are other options which are possible. Start with this small exercise. Describe a typical IIT. Just write down a few sentences about who do you think is a typical IIT. And I'm not asked ITC. Right. Let's have some understanding of what is typical IIT. Who would be volunteer again?
Typically, I think wears t-shirts and spectacles. Chappals are also a must, and they're generally walking alone. Or if in a group, they use the term art quite often.
Everyone?
That is lost working alone in the lost way.
By browsing for latest tech gadgets, reading XKCD, chatting with girlfriend, working on LaTeX all at the same time, belongs to one of the following categories: Tech Janta, Music Janta, Dance Janta, Lit Janta.
Yeah, anybody else? Priyanka?
Tech Janta.
So most important, I think, is intelligence and
Okay, anything else?
DC++. DC++.
Okay.
Surfing on DC++ all the time.
Okay.
Downloading from DC++.
Okay. Yeah, you have some?
I thought geeky looking people are walking towards the institute in the morning.
What's your?
Yeah, so that carrying backpack and walking along.
Okay.
It's down.
Anybody from there?
Just to take bath every week, once every week, and the t-shirts are mostly black, and the ones donated by the
Okay.
Or the department's name written on the
We'll be talking about physics.
Yeah?
We'll be talking about physics and
Okay.
They have overgrown hair.
short, absolutely short, crooked hair.
All right. So, yeah.
In any gathering, academic or social, they are bound to scream H4, H4, despite of what hostel they belong to.
So it's a male.
Okay, good. Yeah. So somehow we seem to know, right? We may be slightly incorrect, because if you ask this to undergraduates and ask them to describe what is typical, it might be slightly different. But there will be a lot of overlap. So we seem to sort of know what a typical IITian is. Similarly, we seem to know a lot of what is typical, except that we never sit down and try and articulate it, right? This was done some years ago, 95. I don't know, things have changed. Typical IITians in 95 were like this. In fact, there were separate names for all of them. Yeah? The last one was called as Magoo. Yeah, the middle one is he's the Android, so there's some Gold. Yeah, yeah. This guy is the one who is looking for GRE and things like that. So there was some name for that. Okay, second year TOEFL, third year GRE type of guys. Yeah. Typical IITians were also like this at that time. This was the collected by, okay. They were collected by our student deliberately as part of this exercise. In '95, we went about trying and find out what is a typical IIT. So there just seemed to be some way of knowing what a typical IITian or what a typical instance is. Okay. To identify a typical, it's one of the most typical examples in that category that is mostly found. When I gave this exercise to some undergraduates in Guwahati, they added one more interesting thing, and that was somewhere along his 4 years, he at least tries to attempt learning a guitar. Okay, that was his description. Okay, so this is a way somehow people sort of know. We are always observing, except that we don't seem to bother to articulate it. Okay, so what makes a typical example? A possible reason is, one of them is it reflects the essence. Okay, this is something which is already kind of known. What you are trying to just now tell me is the kind of an essence of what an IITian is. Most often seen also. Okay, and represents most frequently occurring characteristic, which is what you are trying to tell, that he is either lost or he is multitasking and doing this, downloading something. These are the most frequently occurring characteristics. Some of them are visual characteristics, some of them are behavioral characteristics, some of them can be other sensory characteristics also. So just to revise, we talked about typical, not so typical, atypical, etc., and it creates a gradient. This is how we look at. Okay, so there will be definitely some IITians who would fit into this, some IITians who would fit here, and some IITians who would fit there, right? And similar thing would also happen with IDCians. All right, you want to give me secretly some idea about who fits here? You can pass on a secret note to me. Okay, who do you think is the atypical IDCian? I'd done that exercise also, and it turned out to be, at that time, not now, the person who wears fairly ironed bush shirts, yeah, and fairly ironed trousers, not jeans. It's kind of an atypical IDC at that time. It's also true, more or less, nobody wears that kind of thing in IDC. So what really exists are discrete examples, like all of you or all of IDCians. In the real world, they become part of a mental world, and they become part of a gradient. So we have a cupness of a cup, which is what we are looking for, or we have a theaterness of a theater, we have churchness of a church, templeness of a temple, which is what that typical example is trying to tell us, right? And it's very important for us to know how people consider what is theaterness, what is cupness, what is churchness, or whatever it is. In fact, what is a mixerness of it, or what is a say camera-ness, or whatever it is. So this ness is an important thing, and today we'll just look at how we look at this ness aspect of it. We tried, first time I ran that several years ago, we actually systematically tried to do this as a design exercise, where this person looked at his thing was to try a presentation item for newly married young couple. So he thought that maybe at that time, one of the most traditional thing some 30 years or 40 years ago was to give lemon sets. I don't know why. Okay, so after marriage there will be at least about 6 lemon sets in the house. But now somehow that has died, and now some other items have come. So his idea was that why not we give cups and saucer and a tray and things like that. So he actually looked at and tried to sort of understand what is the mugness of a mug, what is the spoonness, what is the trayness of a tray, and what is the saucerness of saucer, but tried to go away from it a little bit, by which he retains it but tries to redefine it. So actually he was somewhere here, tray, saucer. He was not trying to be close to the mainstream, but he studied the mainstream in order to be away from it by a specific distance. And this is exactly the kind of ability that you need. What will you do if you want to be here? What will you do if you want to be here, here, or here? Right? And all of them must have a logic. We did discuss about this. Some tend to be more mugs than others. right? Some tend to be more cups than others. That is where the cupness of a cup comes in. Sorry. Okay. Which is more bird? First. Right? Agreed? Which is more bird? Why is it suddenly changed? Because the behavior characteristic which is typically associated with bird got added it in the fourth photograph. Actually it's the same species, right? But in a sitting position, in a very static kind of a position, you don't expect a bird to be that kind. Nor do you expect a bird to be viewed from that angle. Yeah, you expect birds to be on the tree, so you always have that common kind of view of you being below and looking at birds this way. So when bird comes and sort of sits next to you in position where you are able to see it from top, you don't feel very comfortable about it. So birdness of bird, it's in looks, it's in actions, it's in behavior. So how do we characterize the central member? One of them is we call as central tendency or core. I'll just give you various definitions of it. It's also essence, it's also in psychology called as schema. Schema is a theory which sort of, it's also kind of a prototype which reflects the essence of that. So it's a prototypical example. These are all different things which different literatures could say. It also says it's an ideal as an example in the category. Sometimes in some literature they just simply say ideal example, which is not correct. It's not ideal in any moral sense. It's ideal as an example in that category. It's also a proper example. I used to teach child, it's something like a proper dog or a proper cup or things like that. Now proper is again proper as an example. Okay. It's a collection of common features also, and that's one of the theory which we'll discuss later on. It's called as feature theory of brain, where you talk about it as collection of features and maybe a combination of some of these. It can be a combination of any of these. Okay, so here it is. So dogs that have small tails, you don't feel very comfortable, right? Because it's not a proper tail. The tail has to be long, it has to wag. Right? Otherwise, it's not a proper tail. And yesterday, I think in that Friday when we had that dog, all of them had long curved legs. Okay, because that's a proper tail. Proper does not mean correct or anything like that. It's a proper example of a tail. And we always intuitively feel the proper example in any culture. So we have an idea about what is a naughty baby or a cry baby or something like that, because we have a concept of proper child. So if a child is more than a proper child, we call it a cry baby. If somebody is more naughty than a proper, so the concept of proper is very clear in all our minds, and we seem to compare every other instance with that and then say that he is naughty, he is mischievous. So what does all this mean? It means that it is against a proper that is there in your mind. So we have a kind of typical proper ideal, or whatever you call it, a proper jug. Which is a proper jug if in India? Yeah. Okay, and now it is gradually getting replaced by plastic ones, right? Which are very similar, but okay. So every culture has some ideas about it. This is not a concept of a tea kettle or a jug here in India, but this is quite European. There it may be considered as a proper. So we have maybe a concept of, in any subculture there will be a concept of what is a proper dress, and then you go away from it, and you can be on the fuzzy boundary. I didn't get the right examples of it, just downloaded, but it's also possible that you might cross a border, and that's where the issue of art comes in. It can either be a piece of art or it can be just a novelty which dies. Okay? When you cross a border, these are the only two options which are available. Now this is a piece of art. This is Goddess of Shopping. It's a sculpture which because it's full of bags, shopping bags. So the dress is made of shopping bags. So it's a piece of art, and it's also a comment on society. But main problem, thing that I am going to talk about is the fact that when you cross a border, it is quite possible. Art does that very comfortably, but sometimes it can just simply become a novelty. Now, there are certain characteristics of cores that you should remember. One of them is core is always dynamic. Okay, the level of dynamism might change from category to category, but it's always dynamic. For instance, it's extremely dynamic right now in mobile phones. Yeah? But you take any religious products, like something to do with say, Samai or any of the thing, it's not as dynamic as it should be. There are some new things that have come in that, but the rate at which they come seem to be much slower than what happens with the popular products like mobile phones and things like that. So there are deemed central members who will eventually take over as a core. Correct? That is what one should look for. What is going to be the deemed central member? Okay, so we have P1 right now as product 1, which is a central member, but over a period it will become P2, which is likely to be close to this, unless in some deemed one that is going to become a central member in future. Yeah, most probably, like deemed university. Okay, something like this will see. In most cases, the shift is very gradual, right? But in some cases, products have appeared here and have become central members. They radically upset the whole characteristic of that, which happens once in a while. I'll show you examples of both of them. Okay. So influencing mainstream is actually influencing social perception, which is basically creating a ripple in the category by which the whole category is shaken. And once the category is shaken, you start finding first that mainstream shifts, the whole gradient shifts, and even the boundary can shift. Office contractor did that with building, and again, it is nothing to do with good or bad. The fact that so many people copied him shows that he has influenced the category. Okay. So what creates ripple has very little to do with good or bad. It is just simple fact that public has accepted it. Large number of people are willing to accept, to the extent that I have a lot of friends who are architects and their clients come and say, but oh, entrance mein aisa Greek column chahiye. That is their idea. One person got a very interesting commission for designing a drama theatre, right? And his clients were basically a trust, which wanted, some industrialist had taken over trust. So his wife called him and says, बहुत अच्छा करना, वो सामने blue glass चाहिए. Okay, what blue glass has got with theatre, it is not important, but she wanted a blue glass in the front. It was something which software companies in Pune have, blue glasses with white walls, right? So that's the way it works. Some of these create ripples. So some of them are very slow and gradual shifts, some of them are sudden departures. Okay, let's example of slow and gradual shift. I don't know whether Olympus or Nikon, one of them first created this twist in the body by which you have a grip there with a, you can see this one with a shutter there, right? This was first created, and it was not created in the digital one. It started with the film roll itself, and it somehow caught on. So everybody else very quickly copied that, and now almost all cameras, including digital cameras, have that particular feature. The body is twisted. You hold it this way, and this is the finger that's used for clicking. Okay, so it's quite likely that a feature might become popular, and over a period, people very quickly start copying it. Nikon came out with the Red Line series. Okay, this was some years ago, and somehow because Nikon is associated with good photography and quality, everybody else copied that, including Vivitar lenses started having one red line somewhere. Okay, so when a feature gets accepted, it sort of mainstream absorbs it very quickly, and everybody starts copying it. The idea that the copying is very simple, that red line is associated with quality. Since I have a red line, I will be associated with quality. So the goodwill gets transferred. Molded luggage found a very slow process of shifting from the very early way of there were just aluminum things in the middle, and there were two shelves, which was a very simple way of constructing. That's the way it started. To a very now they don't use that itself. They just strengthen the thing. So it took some time for the idea of back to shift. There are some who remain on the periphery. Some of them remain as novelties. Some of them, in some features of that, get taken up and gets added into the mainstream, which is exactly what happens in fashion industry. That people who create works on ramp find that some of it percolates down into mainstream over a period and gets accepted as part of the mainstream thing. But by the time the ramp people change anyway.
This accepted is defined by sales and product.
Yes, simple. Accepted is people have started using it. It has nothing to do with being good or bad or anything like that. Actually members on the gradient as well as the members on the fuzzy boundary are actually a resource for ideas. They can be taken. Concept cars are basically a resource for ideas. You borrow from concept car, bring it into a mainstream. This same thing that happens in fashion industry. I don't know, there's a lot of similarity between concept car and fashion industry. Like you have this ramp, you have this concept car introduced to the same drama. Okay, there's a lot of huge launch drama that is created when that is brought into it's exactly like the way fashion works. There are also sudden departures also. A sudden departure was when Sierra brought in that 2.5 box car. Within a matter of 3 years, almost every company had a 2.5 type box car. They actually interpreted in a, this is Peugeot. Peugeot has its own way of doing it. Mercedes has its own way of doing it. Everybody had its own way of doing it, but they had their model in a 2.5 box car because they found that it was functional, it was getting popular. If I am not represented, I lose the market, so very quickly people introduce it. So it's quite likely that the ripple can suddenly sort of take over, and now you find very few sedans at all in the market. Most of them have switched to a 2.5 box cars. Similar thing happened with Volkswagen Golf. When they first introduced it, this was the first hatchback that came in, and you see that everybody had to introduce hatchback very quickly because that became popular, and all the current models actually belong to the Golf as the primary innovation. So you can see Nikon, Mazda, Ford Sierra, they all shifted mainstream towards themselves. Okay, to the extent that they have become the mainstream over a period, not as a brand but as an idea they become mainstream. Okay, Swatch did this for watches. They made so much of noise, and they became so popular that it was very difficult to have a standard dial for a watch anymore. You have to have something colorful happening. Okay, Apple did it for music, Apple did it for the phone, and Nike did this for shoes. And I'll show you an example of how Nike has influenced even normal shoes as we go along. So this happens with ripple effects do come in many other fields also. For instance, low budget films like Satya has influenced normal films. There are several other films like Adha Satya created a new kind of a villain come hero type of thing. So they have all influenced the way mainstream works. A terrible product like Godrej cupboard has influenced people's perception in India of what a safe cupboard is. It, by design, it's terrible. It's one of those patraka dabba with a terrible handle and all that. But it has caught the fascination of not just middle class but also higher class. To the extent that a lot of rich people have a Godrej cupboard and then have another wooden cupboard outside which open it and you have the steel cupboard inside. It's a very common thing to do. Yeah? Because they feel that that is reflected, that reflects safety, I must have it, and that's a common kind of a practice, right? And it has actually, I thought that net chair will also become like that, but net chairs doesn't seem to have picked up as much as other chairs. But beanbag hasn't caught. Why?